Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Raymore City Council work session for Monday, November the 18th, 2019. We've got a lot on our agenda tonight. First two items reference the Chapter 100 programs for two projects that we have been planning for, and I will open it up with item A, Project 100 program, the venue project, and Mr. Fearborn will start us off.
Thank you, Your Honor. For both items A and B on the agenda tonight, the reason we wanted to put them on is because, as most of you know, they're going to be before you legislatively next Monday night. Chapter 100 in and of itself has been explained to you all a couple of times, but there are certain subtleties with each Chapter 100 presentation, so we thought it might be worth talking about those subtleties tonight, just informationally. The mayor will have a statement after this, but the point being that next Monday night, the projects themselves will be pretty extensive and complex enough in and of that. So I thought maybe if we could get the stair step of just here is what Chapter 100 is as it applies specifically to Project A and Project B tonight, we could kind of get those questions out of the way so you're all clear in your mind relative to that. The only reason the developers are here is so that you're familiar with their faces. We would not necessarily expect any questions to go directly to them because it might be going a little bit over the edge, but it's always just nice to have those great faces in front of you all so you can put the face with the name next week. To that end, Mr. Mayor, if you have any.
I don't know that I can add to that, what you had to say. Tonight, as you see, we have our staff, our knowledgeable staff here with us tonight, as well as Sid Douglas, the attorney that we like to use for these types of projects. He's here to explain Chapter 100 for us, so we'll just go ahead and proceed, if that's all right, Jim.
Very good, Mr. Douglas.
Good evening, everybody. As the mayor and city manager pointed out, we're kind of talk generally about the projects and what the tax abatement or what the economic incentive is trying to be accomplished with each of these projects. For this particular project, I think you're a little familiar overall with it because some of the planning and zoning aspects of it has already been discussed, but it's a approximately $26.5 million project, build 204 townhome units at the corner of South Dean and North Cass Parkways, northeast corner of that intersection. Lots of times with Chapter 100, the primary purpose is to actually provide tax abatement and have some kind of payment in lieu of tax to reduce some kind of a tax burden that would be applicable to the project. In this case, for these townhomes, the object is to try to ascertain a budgeted tax that would be paid. The point is not truly to try to find a tax abatement incentive, but it is to fix the amount of taxes that they would expect to be paid over a defined time. In this case, they're looking for the fixed schedule for 25 years from when the projects would be completed. The first phase of those projects are expected to be coming online in 2022. And ultimately, hopefully, if everything goes well, is that all the 204 units will be constructed and occupied in 2023. That would kick in the 25 years of fixing of the payment in lieu of taxes because it comes off the tax rolls from the city's ownership. But at that point, we're expected to fix the payment in lieu of tax to what we would have expected the taxes to have been. And this gives them the ability to avoid the fluctuations of increases or other adjustments in assessed valuation they get from property over time coming from the assessor's office. We've had some discussions with the assessor's office, shown them the plans and the scope of the project, including all the amenities. They've come up with an identifiable cost of what they think is going to be an appraised value for the project, and we've taken that and used that as a model to calculate what the taxes would be for that with a 2% adjustment in every odd year beginning in 2025. The full length of the agreement would terminate in 2047 regardless of what the schedule is and how the projects come online. But taking the cumulative costs and broken that down into the number of doors or units in the development, that works out to be a cost of $1,241 per unit. And so as each one of those units come on board and there's a certificate of occupancy delivered, then the beginning in the next year, that's when the payment in lieu of tax would begin for each of those units. For the assumptions and the cost benefit analysis, we've assumed half the units will be completed in 2022 and the remaining balance in 2023. And that gives us the overall cost benefit that it would be shown, and what it'll cost and what they expect the property taxes to be over the 25-year period. The one tax or economic incentive that would be available as a result of the project is that the construction costs for materials of constructing the facilities would be avoided, and we have an estimate of those costs, and that would result in maybe about $500,000 of sales tax exemptions on the construction materials. I think that's a summary of what is expected to be considered. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Is there any questions?
And my crayon interpretation of this has always been in both of the Chapter 100s that are coming before you tonight in various different ways. And of course, as Sid had indicated, in the case of a residential component like what is being proposed in A here, they want the payment to be broken down by either the unit or they use the door. Well, of course, each of these units only has one door, so it's by the door. And the key with both of the presentations is the developers want a known expense that they can black and white to make sure that the project is going to work. And I see that a lot with the Chapter 100 presentations that are made. It's to get to a footing that they know is going to go forward throughout the entire life of the project. Whether it's escalating or whatever, those percentages are set ahead of time. I think that would be fairly accurate.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Holman?
Thank you. So if we were to agree to this, then at least for some time, the city would technically own this property. Is that a correct statement, sir?
During the entire term of the abatement, the city would own all the buildings that would be constructed, all the amenities, and you would be leasing it to the developer.
And what's the scenario in the case of default or bankruptcy? Obviously, it's one we don't want to see.
There's no impact to the city's credit. The city, even though they're issuing the bonds and will be technically owning the facility, if there's, the company is buying the bonds, so they're not out on the market for anybody else to own, so they have no risk there, and the city has no obligation to make a payment on the bonds other than what they get from the developer in the form of the lease payments.
Okay.
And
they do have the option of buying basically at any time. They could come and say, hey, we want to purchase this and we'll take over ownership. Is that
if
correct?
for whatever reason they wanted to collapse the deal, they're always entitled to exercise an option to purchase the entire project or different components of it. And at that point, then the city's out of the deal and they are subject to the normal rules for property tax impositions.
And so just, I think I understand this for clarification of the math, the current taxes being paid on this section of land roughly come to about $2,300 a year. We would see nothing in that for the first 3 years because of construction, and they wouldn't be fully occupied until that time. But then in year 4, that would grow to I guess a pilot payment or payment in lieu of taxes of $126,000 and change.
Okay, yeah, on page 4.
Page 4, yes, sir.
Yes. Yes, yeah, there is 3 elements to determine what the payment in lieu of tax is. There's a fixed element for the cost of the land, and so that will continue to be paid. And then the estimated improvement pilot, and then the column for the total. So yes, those will be the payment in lieu of taxes. The first year in 2022 is assuming half the units would be constructed and ready, and then it jumps up the next year because we're assuming the other half come online. And at that point, in 2025, we have an automatic escalator of 2% every other year.
And those pilot payments would be distributed among the various taxing districts based on the amount of taxation they would normally, or the percentage of taxes that they would get of that. Is that
But it
correct?
gets their proportionate share just like they otherwise would.
It's just a different way of taxation, more or less.
Yes, it's payment in lieu of tax to eliminate the fluctuations they might get from the assessor on the valuation of the
Change in
property.
assessed value. Thank you,
So
sir.
they're just trying to get it, as Mr. Fearborn said, is they identify what they can budget. Everybody knows, it's kind of a good deal for everybody. The developer knows, but all the taxing districts know what they're going to receive from this as they put together the budget. So it works, it's positive for everybody involved.
And one other question, sir, if you don't mind. If they were to sell the property, is this agreement transferable, or is it null and void?
There are provisions that would allow it to be transferred, but it would be to another developer or property owner, management company that has experience and expertise to run a facility like this.
Thank you.
Good question. Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Townsend?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Holman asked a few of the questions I had. I just wanted to kind of clarify some of the mechanics of this. I believe you said earlier on with these industrial revenue bonds that the developer buys the bonds, so this wouldn't enter the market for individual.
That's correct.
Okay, so in regard to that. And then there was comments about as the units come online and phasing, receiving the certificate of occupancy. So when the bond is it issued at the full 26 million, or is it issued in the based on phases of construction?
It's what we would refer to as a drawdown bond. It's kind of like a line of credit. So the bond would show a not to exceed amount of $26,500,000. As they incur costs related to the development, and the land is transferred to the city at the time of the issuance of the bonds, as those costs are incurred, then the principal amount of the bonds would increase over time as the projects are completed.
I see. Okay. In your experience with dealing with these types of projects, as it was asked earlier, this is a townhome unit that has residents living in it. So should a bankruptcy happen, the city owns it. We're now a landlord. Am I correct in that assumption?
You are technically leasing it to the developer, so you don't have a contractual relationship with the actual tenants, but you are a landlord in the sense that you own it and you are leasing it to the developer. There will be standard provisions that would be included in the lease that would provide that they'll keep the property insured. They'll pay any special assessments that might be imposed against the property, and most importantly, if something happens, slip and fall, anything like that, that they'll provide not only public liability insurance, but indemnification to cover the city in the event of those occurrences.
Okay. And do we have any other bonds such as this? I don't believe I saw any on the budget. Obviously, this is not something that the city budgets for.
This is
There's
a
nothing-
non-budgeted item for the
Correct.
city.
So how would this
We
be
are,
reflected on our books?
it's,
Would it be?
it's not our books.
It wouldn't be at
It's
all.
the developer's books. That's correct, sir.
Okay.
Sid, would it be safe to say that in the event of a bankruptcy, the new leasee would be the bank they went bankrupt to?
Yeah, I think there's event of default for bankruptcy, so, I mean, you could terminate the whole thing and collapse it if that's what everybody chose to do. So, in that case, You could elect to either terminate the tax abatement, let it go on the, whatever happens with the bankruptcy, or you could wait to see what happens. You know, bankruptcy could be a lot of different things. It could just be reorganization of debt, and they would continue to own it. It could be something where it's a liquidation of the assets and it would be potentially sold to somebody else.
Got it.
And I didn't want to harp on that particular topic, not to say that that this is a potential, it's a potential with any business, but not to say that this particular developer is leading down that line. It was just curiosity on my part that if this was to pass by council, in that eventuality, would the city have some sort of operational responsibilities for this particular project or project be in any
No,
capacity?
you would never have any operational responsibilities.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a general Chapter 100 question, again, for clarification. I thought that Mr. Holman said that, asked if they could sell the property before they had returned the payment on the bonds. And I thought you said yes, but how could they sell it if the city owns it?
They have the, well, I guess technically it would be an assignment of their leasehold rights. So it would not be an actual transfer of legal title, but somebody would be able to assume the rights under the lease agreement to lease the facilities and then collect the rentals.
Thank you for being here. All right. If you hadn't been, the meeting would go a lot longer. You talk so much.
Okay, next item is the Chapter 100 program for the Van Trust Real Estate Project. Mr. Douglas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This project will be substantially different from the one we just talked about. The purpose of the Chapter 100 in this context is actually to provide significant economic incentives to the developer. The overall project is about a $105 million development. It is projected to include 1,750,000 square feet of Class A commercial industrial warehousing type space. There's a lot of the development will be dictated by market conditions as they occur, but it's expected that the first building that would come out of the ground would be at least 500,000 square feet. And we're showing a projection right now just for assumptions that there'll be 3 more buildings of approximately 416,000 square feet. This is being developed very close as I-49 and North Cass Parkway. The development of the buildings is expected to occur over a 4-year period beginning in 2021 through 2024. The level of abatement is going to be for 20 years from when a project is built and comes online. And there's going to be a payment in lieu of tax that will be gradually increasing over time. So it would, for the first 5 years, the payment in lieu of tax will be 3 cents per square foot of the building. The next 3 years it is 6 cents per square foot. The next 2 years is 8 cents. The next 2 years is 11 cents. 3 more years at 46 cents, and then the last 5 years at 71 cents. The net impact of that is you can see on page 4 of the plan that discuss approximately what the payment in lieu of tax would be each year if each of the buildings are constructed in accordance with plans. To the extent that there is an adjustment in timing or adjustment in the size of the buildings, then the payment in lieu of tax would adjust accordingly so that the payment in lieu of taxes would be measured by the percent per square, or dollar amount per square foot that we just discussed. Contrary to the townhome project, there is significant tax abatement that is expected in this project. The projected taxes, if nothing occurs over the 20-year period, would be a little bit less than $20,000. As built, if there was no tax abatement, it would be expected that over that 20-year period, there'd be approximately $43 million of taxes paid. With the schedule of payment in lieu of taxes, the overall amount of taxes or payment in lieu of taxes is expected to be approximately $9,870,000, resulting in a property tax abatement of a little over $33 million over the 20-year time period. In addition to that, as we talked about on the sales tax exemption for the prior project, there would be a sales tax exemption for this project also. It would be significantly more, obviously, because there's, instead of a $26 million project, it's projected to be a $105 million project. So the estimated sales tax revenues subject to exemption would be approximately $1.3 million based on projections of where the materials would be purchased. So if it's purchased in the state of Missouri and outside the city, then, you know, you're paying some taxes, but, and some of it will be purchased locally, but, you know, based on the projections, that there'll be another $1.3 million of sales tax exemptions savings for the construction of the project. We did, on this project, have input from the Fire Protection District. They are entitled to push for being exempted out, basically, from it being included in the abatement of any of the property taxes, and they have consented or agreed to go along with the project and take their proportionate share like everybody else is. But I think I'll pause there and let you guys ask any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Does this project, or is it impacted, or does the taxing districts or the TDD or the CIDs come into play at all with this, in this area?
To the extent that any of the TDDs or CIDs are in a place where somebody's purchasing construction materials, then those, there's potential, but there's no way of knowing where they would purchase those materials and if or what TDD would be applicable and what the rates are. So we do not,
only if they purchase in this area,
inside the boundaries of the TDD.
And I think, council member, that you were actually considering the TDDs and the CIDs that are within this area, not necessarily citywide.
Right.
So because there's currently no development there, they wouldn't be impacted.
Mr. Holman.
I'm curious how this, this proposal compares to other like proposals. One in particular, the North Point development at Belton has, which is somewhat similar in nature up there just off of 155th Street.
This the schedule is similar to what is made available for the North Point. There are much more public infrastructure costs that the developer's undertaking than what was done on the North Point project. And so in the early years, the level of payment in lieu of tax is a little bit less than what North Point is expected to be paying. But in the back part of the project, the payments are expected to be more than what North Point would be paying.
Overall, as Sid indicated, when you get to the end of it, the percentage being asked for is just slightly lower than the percentage that's being asked for North Point. And as Sid indicated, the developer at the beginning is taking on, the reason it's lower in the beginning is because the developer is proposing to build the road in sections and put the water in and any of the other utilities that are necessary for this particular project, sir.
The follow-up question, sir. So as far as we know right now, they're not asking for additional infrastructure at the city's behest other than this ask here. Is that a correct
correct,
statement?
sir.
Okay,
None.
thank you.
Mr. Townsend?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Similar to the other project, I believe, as I was looking at here, this also has a phased approach to being constructed, so similar concept on the bond, it'd be a drawdown. But this one brings up an additional question. This is being a commercial entity and subject to the market. If the market says that, you know, and the firm determines that 4 buildings are enough, or 3 buildings are enough, at what point does that $100 million bond, you know, goes away, or does it stay for the term of the IDR?
The idea in this project will be is that we will be issuing multiple series of bonds, because as a building is completed, we'll do abatement on that, because it'll be 20 years for a particular building. There is a possibility that they would complete more than one building at approximately the same time. So in that case, we may do one bond issue to cover both buildings. But the idea would be to phase those in so that it matches up with the total amount of bonds to be issued, not to exceed the 105 million. But again, it's the development and the timing and the size of the buildings and the type of the buildings will be dictated by market conditions. So we've just made some assumptions based on the developer's current best expectations that, you know, that they think that the first building would be, it would be appropriate to be about 500,000 square feet. It may be that it turns out to be 1 million square feet. It could be 600,000. It could be the 500,000. There's no way of knowing. It'll be dictated by what tenants come online. Similarly, the same thing will be true as when the next buildings occur will be dictated by demand and market conditions of when they're ready to build and put tenants in those.
I see. So in this regard, this is they're building it because they have a tenant. It's not build it and they will come. Regardless, if they build it and we've issued a bond, then we are still receiving payment regardless of if they have a tenant in or not.
That might be a question better asked of the developer, but, from their perspective, they would like to be building buildings when they know they have a tenant.
Correct.
But this is a very substantial developer, and they may very well be building a building with the hopes of somebody will take the project, or at least different portions of it. So there may be some speculative aspect of it. A lot of these buildings, you'll find that, my experience is listening and talking to developers, is that unless you've got something going, that it's a little hard for them to, there's a lot of different options, even in the metropolitan area. So if they've got something that they know is ready to go and they could move in versus this is going to take a while to be built, it may not fit into their business plans and models. So it'll be dictated by a lot of things like that.
I've seen some of their projects around town, and like you said, they have a reputation in the area. So I was just curious on the payment plan of the pilot. Regardless if there's a tenant, even if the bond is issued, there's still payment coming in. That's on them to figure out the tenant aspect of it.
Yes, I mean, and it's, much like the other one, this company will be buying the own bonds, so they'll make a lease payment to the city for the rental of the project, and it turns around and flips back to them in form of a debt service payment, so it's kind of like right pocket to left pocket. So it's not really an economic problem from their standpoint.
Sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I see on here and I know this is a fluid number and it's not set, but roughly $17 million is the estimated value of the project when completed. This doesn't take into calculation, this doesn't take into account the property appreciating every year. So when we say that roughly $33 million is about how much money we would be abating, thank you. That doesn't account for that roughly $17 million property going up in value every year. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's a 2% No, I guess on this one, there's not any adjustment, it's just dollar per square foot, so it'll be,
So in year 20, for example, if that property was worth 27 million, we're still using that $17 million figure through the whole
That would be correct.
amortization period?
that would be correct.
Okay. Do properties like this generally, this may not be the question for you, maybe for the city, but do properties like this generally appreciate in value over time? Is there a certain amount of time where they start to depreciate? What would the expectation be after 20 years?
They would definitely be expected to appreciate over time, I mean, especially in the early years. I mean, you're talking about 20 years from now, depending upon, what goes on in the market, and the businesses that have been in those facilities. There's always a possibility that they will go down. But as, if anybody's owned a business, you have a facility that's commercial purposes, it generally is going to be increasing over time.
And what's the total value of the projects?
The overall estimated cost for the project's $105 million.
No, not
Now that-
not 17. I was
Okay.
thinking, this is a really
Oh,
small,
that's okay.
That's just
And-
buildings for
Okay.
And- and-
building too.
Okay, gotcha.
And a portion of those costs are, public infrastructure, streets, roads, water, sewer lines. And so it doesn't necessarily build into the value of the building itself, but they are costs that need to be incurred and paid in order to make the project come to reality.
All right. Thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Holman?
Thank you, sir. So the benefits of a project like this to the city, obviously, there's diversification of our business base because we really don't have an industrial area right now. We don't have anything like this. There are certainly jobs that come with this, and those jobs can vary depending upon who the tenants are. So that's another thing that's a very good thing for the city. And maybe Mr. Gress, Mr. Carteret, you know the answer, perhaps the developer does. Is there any economic benefit to having something like this and drawing end-user retail? My point being that a place like a Walmart or Best Buy, in addition to the placement of a store, they're obviously concerned about logistics. How close can we bring stuff in from? If it's a long haul, that's considerably more cost to them. I don't know if there's anything within your realm of expertise that tells you, yes, this may, depending upon, of course, who the end tenant is there a draw to retail based on this type of project?
Quick response would be absolutely yes, and we experienced that because of the commercial tract to the north, Tract 1. Without question, when Van Trust expressed interest in doing this development of almost 2 million square foot of space, instantly brought attention and attraction to the commercial land that we have directly to the north. So a quick answer absolutely has that impact.
And I think one thing that you lots of times see is if you end up in the next 5 years and you got almost 2 million square feet of this type of space, it's creating a lot of jobs. People will be willing to travel some distance, for those kind of jobs, but you have relocations of people that'll be moving to the community. It's impossible to guesstimate how many jobs would result in new home construction or occupying, the townhome project or whatever it may be. But as more people are in the community, whether it's just coming to work or whether they come to live and work, that helps drive sales tax dollars for commercial businesses also. So there is clearly a ripple effect that a project like this would have in your community.
I'd actually forgotten. So you have, from a job standpoint, you have temporary job, the construction people that come to the area and spend dollars here, obviously, as well as permanent job creation from the people that are going to be working in these facilities. Thank you, sir.
Anyone else? As we begin to teeter on the other side of the argument, it's supposed to be brought up at the legislative portion, but getting close, but good questions. Good conversation here. Do you have anything else, Tim?
no, sir. Mr. Gress will
I
be
know you
wanting
were
to talk with you after the meeting, sir.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny. All right, Anybody else have any questions of Sid before we end this item number 2 tonight? Or staff? If not, thank you all for being here. Thanks, Sid. Appreciate you. Grant, good seeing you again. And the next item is the item C, which is future no tax increase general obligation bond issues that we've spoken of over the past couple of weeks. And I have a handout here from staff. Wait for those to get around before we call upon Mr. Fearborn to begin the discussion on that. Everybody's got their hand out there? Okay.
What you all have before you, staff had indicated when we first brought up the possibility, and the council had given us the thumbs up on proceeding with kind of putting some projects together. What you have before you is what I am referring to as a green light, yellow light, red light, as far as possible staff recommendations on some projects. The real meat and potatoes of the discussion for this, we are anticipating for your next work session on December 2nd. We wanted to get this out to you so you would have the opportunity to review it. Feel free to give us a call with any questions you might have relative to it. As you know, we have now gone to a year-round CIP process. And this is a direct resultant of that process. Wanted to give you some thoughtful information relative to it. The one that I would want to bring up, because it is kind of a state of flux. As you all know, we continue to move forward very rapidly on the interchange and the bridge and widening I-49. And you will see as one of the green light projects, the Ward Road expansion, and we have on there just directly below it, or directly to the side of it, that the county cost share on that could be at a minimum $3 million, and the county has also talked about maybe actually going 50-50 on the Ward Road project, in which case it would free up even more money than if they only went to the $3 million. But the dynamic is the county is in partnership with us and with Belton relative to the 58 highway bridge and the widening of I-49. So all of that would play into this as far as how a partnership would go and what those two projects would look like within the bond issue. We may want to, from a political aspect, I believe, and I think most of you would concur with this, that the idea of having some component on a ballot issue that says we're widening I-49 and improving the bridge is going to do nothing but garner us even more votes, along with the ones from anybody who has to use Ward Road. So having both of those on a ballot issue would be really powerful for the garnering of some positive votes relative to that. And of course, in a work session is the only way I can say that, because otherwise it sounds like I'm advocating for the bond issue, which of course I'm not. This is information only. So at the end of the green, you see the 3. And so what all of this would assume is that approximately 4,500 of the 7,500,000 that's going to be necessary to improve Ward Road would come from the city, 3 million would come from the county, and then we would put 3 million, that 3 million that we're saving on Ward Road, to have it on the ballot issue for the bridge and highway project. Best of both worlds for everybody. We have also learned that the county portion for either of those, the county is actually passed and waiting, as Sid had indicated earlier, they actually have drawdown ability on a previously passed road bond issue of $11 million. So they have money to put to both of these projects, and on several occasions, both the presiding commissioner and Commissioner Odom have committed to those dollars for both Ward Road and the project out on the highway. So we're in a very, very good spot right now, we think, with the county. The only thing that could possibly lead to a different recommendation on our part and pushing all the money into the Ward Road project is the county is also willing to foot the entire local bill, possibly foot the entire local bill for the I-49 bridge project, similar to what they did at North Cass Parkway. But in this case, the difference in that dynamic is they're not footing a project that has a bunch of dirt around it that's just now starting to look like it's going to develop. They would be pushing a TDD for an already developed area with known businesses. So you just simply draw your dotted line of the new TDD, and you have the sales tax information and the property tax information from those businesses already, and you see if you can form up a TDD with sales tax only. And if we could get Walmart into that, you could probably drive that. Any business that is east of the interstate and west of Dean Avenue, there is not a single business in there that is incentivized. They're all at the baseline sales tax right now. If you could get a Walmart in there and get that TDD sales tax down to like 1/10 of a cent for 10 years, that's almost a no-brainer, and Walmart will for sure see that this is a help to them. We learned from Mr. Goffey last week that it is something of an urban legend that Walmart does not like to come into sales tax incentive districts. They do if they see a direct benefit that is great to them, and I can't imagine them not seeing the benefit to having that bridge fixed so that people can get to them easier. So that would be the only thing that would change this proposal, but it would still mean that all of the projects are still moving forward that are in the green light area. And of course, yellow light is great projects. We just don't know if we're going to be able to fit them in to this particular bond issue. Obviously, if there's some savings someplace, there's some moving around of the chess pieces that could take place here. Maybe we still get the county to totally incentivize, do the TDD, and give us half of the money for Ward Road, because eventually we'll take that over then. So they have reason to do both of those. That would free up money for perhaps Kurzwell Road to be on here, which is another section that's going to need help as well. The reds are all eventual projects, just not right now in staff's mind. They will come up, and the classic example of that is going to be the 58 highway overlay we'll get 10 to 15 years out of it with good maintenance, but then it's going to have to happen again. So the council is aware, if we were just to take the green light projects and okay those, the total for all of the projects that's in front of you is $38,006,000. The green projects only is $22,293,000. Council will remember that we will have the ability conservatively to go for at least $23 million in bond issue, and we could do drawdown periods. Of those green light projects, parks projects amount to $3,900,000. Example is the expansion of the RAC. Street projects, $13,893,000, and public safety projects, $4,500,000. My last statement to the council this evening, the $4,500,000 for public safety, we set that aside as a separate bond issue, a third bond issue project. We could, and that involves the street lights throughout the city. That brings every single city street up to current street light standards. The reminder I would give the council on that particular project is the same one that I have given you before relative to sidewalk projects. Don't assume everyone wants a sidewalk. It seems logical, but there will be a lot of people, there will be a lot of people against that particular portion of the bond issue because they don't like streetlights. They want to be able to see the stars at night. So if you're thinking about, is this really a project that we want to put on a bond issue? then that would free up $4,500,000 for other items. I've slowly watched Mr. Crass on this particular project get really, really scared. He's like, because he knows what happens with these. He's the one who always has to present the sidewalk projects, and you all know you've had people in front of you adamant about that particular item. So with that, that concludes staff report tonight, and I'll give you the summary numbers. I've got that as a separate sheet for you all. It involves $600,000 direct to Ward 1, $400,000 direct to Ward 2, $5,750,000 direct to Ward 3, $7,543,000 Ward 4, and all wards $8 million. Happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Fairborn. Excellent listing that you have here. I've had a question asked of me on several occasions, and you've spoken to it before, but if you could just rehash this regarding the Hawk Ridge Park, and we are going through a fundraising effort as opposed to potentially a bond, that we could, decision behind that, and
The city provided the baseline for it. We are providing the park itself. It's a very expensive proposition, $850,000. I will tell the council, and I was actually going to do this on December 2nd when we started to flesh some of these out. We're going to have some diagrams and some blueprints for you all. The park board actually saw the parks portion of this list in work session last week, and they actually wanted to move the patio feature from here, take it out, and replace that with $850,000 to simply buy all the pieces that are there. We actually have fundraising that has been done in excess of $100,000 for it, so that $850 would not necessarily be the full $850 unless we wanted to add a new piece, which we always could. But it is on this list. It is a possibility. We have a feature that's almost the exact same price as that right back here. In essence, what we plan to do with the money that we have, and you've heard me refer to it as Lake Fury before because they do that to me. They already funded is doing a different stormwater detention plan that's taken care of and putting grass over there. This particular project called for continuing to try to create the municipal circle as some sort of a center, whether it be a governmental center or an economic center for the city, and so create that patio feature out there as well as some additional parking. We find ourselves with getting shorted on parking in the back, especially these days. But that is out there as a possibility.
I'm glad to hear the Parks Board kind of initiated some thought on that and looked at that long range and considering that, so thank you.
Mr. Holman.
Thank you, sir. And kind of dovetailing off Councilmember Townsend's comments, one thing to remember, especially coming off the heels of our last Geo Bond project, this is not like going to buy a car because these numbers change. Sometimes they go up, sometimes they go down, or we find other funding sources that come into this. One, for example, Councilmember Townsend, I believe Parks has within capital plan an additional 100, 150 that'll go into that project next year. Is that correct, sir? They'll go into the Hawk Ridge project. I know there's some additional funding coming out of their capital plan, I think, that goes towards that.
I know that they have over the course of several years, both TB Hanna and this particular park getting bits from the park sales tax fund.
And then another one, the Johnson Drive to the Outer Road, Harmon Drive, which we talked a little bit about last year. We put $55,000, and there's a possibility, depending upon if there's some cost savings on the Kentucky Road realignment, we might be able to allocate some of that money. And then anything that when this is done, anything that's left over, we can allocate towards other project of like nature, correct, sir?
Of like nature, sir.
Yes.
Mr. Bellwood, did you have a question? Oh, but I saw you didn't go up there. Anybody else have anything?
Last thing I would point out, sir, is the like nature I meant to add this to the idea of the streetlight project being public safety. If that were to pass and we were to find a whole lot of people coming forward going, please don't, please don't, please don't, the $4,500,000 would then be limited to something for public safety, because that's the nature of how we would pass it in a bond issue. If you passed it as a streets issue rather than a public safety issue, then a much broader scope of what that money could be applied to. You always kind of like to have public safety on there just because, again, that yes vote thing.
Mr. Holman?
I have one more, and it's really more for thought purposes as opposed to a hard answer. So we've got the Route 58 overlay in red, and you talked a little bit about that, and we just did it recently. Now this is assuming the current city roadway boundaries, what we have for roadway maintenance, correct?
Yes, sir.
Because that could change under two conditions pretty rapidly. One would be if the project were to go forward at 49 and 58, and we have to replace those route miles that MoDOT will insist on giving up, and we have to take road maintenance all the way out to 291. And the other is if we do end up annexing this area, we're going to have to pour some capital dollars into that. So to me, that one's got some consideration from possible future projects that we may be doing. We may need a significant cache of money to bring that up to standard, along with obviously some of the other infrastructure out to the east. So.
And Mr. Kraus and I, we would have to, and it's a substitution issue, but in addition to 58, or maybe for not quite as much of 58, we already maintain a significant portion for the county and for MoDOT of J Highway going to the south. So for something that we're already doing, we would just formalize it and get some of those route miles from there as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Certainly something to chew on over the next few weeks. If there's nothing else on item C, we'll move on to city attorney and city prosecutor contracts.
This will be a nice, quick item. I am pleased to report to the council that in discussions with Mr. Zur and Mr. Marshall, they have both indicated that they are perfectly willing to extend their contracts for another 2 years under the exact terms and conditions. The council had directed me to approach them for that. We will be placing their contracts, as well as my contract, on for the first and second reading in the month of December, because next Monday night is a huge agenda for you all. Come prepared. It will be, we just thought we'd push those off to another, there's time for all three of them, so.
All right, thank you.
That includes staff report on this item.
Any questions on item D? No, we'll move on to item E then, utilizing goats to complete brush removal.
This is Mr. Carteret.
Mr. Carteret?
Thank you, sir. Back in October at your work session when the topic first came up, council requested some additional research to be completed. It actually requested specifically if we could find any of the ordinances that other communities that allow this activity had on the books. The communities that we know allow this activity, I spoke with their staff. This would be Liberty and Smithville here in Missouri, and Shawnee on the Kansas side. All those communities handle this in the form of licensing, like a contractor, like a business that would come up, be invited upon your property to do an activity, trim trees, mow your grass, shampoo the carpets in your house. This would be no different in their eyes. These communities did not adopt any specific ordinances, so unfortunately, there are no examples for ordinances regarding this use that I could find, nor did they have any specific restrictions on the business, similar to what we talked about when the topic first came up. We feel, at least for our residents, for our community, if council were to classify these businesses in the same manner, that it is a business that simply has to have a license to operate within the city. that we take an approach where we adopt some specific guidelines for this particular type of business. Wouldn't have to be within the code itself. It's something that we could do through a SOP or other process, but perhaps have some guidelines for this particular activity. So in the memo that was included in your packet, I listed out the standard requirements to get a license. That would be for any business within the community. But if council did want us to proceed with this and allow this activity as a standard business, perhaps we look at special requirements. And I suggest 4, because I think this particular use is a little bit out of the norm than, when you start trying to compare it to the contractor business, lawn maintenance and that. This is a little bit different. It's very much about expectations that you have as a neighbor. What do you expect your neighbor to be able to have on their property or do on their property? And certainly trimming trees and having a contractor come in and mow, expected to see that. To have a contractor to come in and bring in goats for maintenance, not necessarily expected. So I think we need to have some guidelines for that. What I recommend, I included in the memo, let's quickly go through them. Certainly, they need to be contained by a fence upon the property, and the operators of these businesses do that. When we gave the examples of some city park departments, bring them in for some difficult terrain area, they bring in temporary fences in those instances. If we're talking about a residential property, it either already needs to be fenced in, or the operator would have to bring in a temporary fence. We think the hours that the goats can be on the property should match the hours that a contractor can be working outside of the property, and that's 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. I think we should identify that goats can only be present on the property for a maximum number of days per calendar year. I suggest 6, and doing the research and talking through that. In some instances, this may have to occur once, probably at the most twice a year if somebody were to have it. And at that point, you may be able to have them come in for a day, just one day, and get the work done, but more than likely it would have to be over a 2 or 3 day period. They're not allowed to have them overnight. Those are the hours, so they could bring them in one day, take them home, bring them in another day. But I think we need to have a maximum number of days. Again, that expectation is you wouldn't want your neighbor to bring them in to mow the grass if you would, on a bi-weekly basis. And then the 4th item I think we would want to look at is they can only be brought in by a licensed vendor. So you can't have your uncle or a friend that has goats simply invite them onto your property. It has to be under a licensed vendor, just like we would with the contractor process. So I would suggest those as special requirements, just this is the direction council would want to go. Don't know that it would take any formal action. We're not amending the code. We would simply begin to classify the business as a vendor within our community, and handle it in that manner, and then have the SOP in place for these guidelines. So as that individual gets licensed to do the work of the community, they understand what the rules are to do that. The vendors I've spoken with about this use, I think, would be fully amenable to the requirements that we placed, and most of these are standard for them anyways. So that would conclude staff report on this item.
So Jim, if it weren't part of the code, how could you enforce any of the restrictions that you place upon within your suggestions?
We would handle it through, again, the enforcement of a license. Is if a contract or a business in general violated a provision or an operation of, for example, a contractor, if they're not abiding by our hours of operation, we have means to enforce that. We think this would be limited in nature enough to not have to rise to the level of adoption into the code. If we run into a situation, we could always go back and make that adjustment to the code. But I think from the beginning of it, front end of it, I don't feel it's necessary.
Because right now, all we've got is really one resident asking to be able to do this, correct?
At this time, yes.
In addition to the fact that the SOPs apply to the specifics of the situation, but several of them, like the hours of operation, we are applying the code as it currently exists. The contractor can't be there except for those particular hours. So where the code exists, we would be enforcing it against them, and the enforcement elbow, if you would be that they got to come in here and get a license.
Mr. Townsend?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just to further, everyone's paying for the Chiefs game. The mayor asked the question regarding how you would enforce the recommended restrictions here. And I was just curious, you didn't speak to the 6 days a year, but from an enforcement perspective, would that be neighbors reporting that in? And then secondly, what if the property owners for this particular usage says, I want this part of my property, but just to see how you work for me, okay, that went well, I'm gonna have you come out now and do another area of my property within the same year, does that create a violation? Maybe a rhetorical question to consider as we're massaging this, if it doesn't want to come out as rules, to consider that aspect of it if, from an enforcement, and then two, if the property owner says, I only want you to do this part of my property just to test you out, but then now, or I just want to use you now, and then later on have you come out and do another area of my property, it may cause a violation because only, or it took longer than 6 days to do those two pieces of property. So.
There was no magic specifically to the 6 days, and it's similar to other code provisions that we have where we have limitations on how many times you could do something on your property or how long of a time span. It is all about general enforcement and reasonableness. You try to apply a reasonable standard. 6 days in one instance is a lot, and in another instance it may not be enough depending upon how much property we're looking at, et cetera. How would we know specifically? I mean, we know the contractor will be licensed. We may not know what day they arrive. If neighbors have concerns, they're going to let us know the day they arrive, and we'll be able to monitor that closely. If neighbors are aware that this is going to happen, we may not be aware. They already have been out there for a few days. So like any enforcement mechanism, we just try to apply reasonableness to it. So we felt we should have a standard in there, and that's why we felt comfortable with 6 days, 3 days for an event, do 2 events, so that we're not limiting it to 2 events, but it seemed to be the fair approach, and gives an opportunity for somebody to actually bring them in more than once a year.
Yep, Mr. Burt.
I said I wasn't going to do this, but I'll do it anyway. They are going to need more than one application in a year. In order to kill poison ivy, they store starch under the ground in their roots, and you have to starve them out, and it takes about 9 months to starve them out. So you need about 3 or 4 applications of destroying all the leaves and vines above ground in order for it to work. So they might need, if it takes 3 days times 3, they would need a couple more days.
There you go. Who knew? Mr. Circa.
When you talk about the hours of operation for contractors to 8 p.m., I can see the daylight and stuff at late fall. Of course, it gets dark earlier, so would contractors actually be working here with the lights on at night, or would they come in and, if they're late fall, want to have goats work until 8 o'clock at night? That's why I said it's 7 to 8. I thought maybe it would go by seasonal time. Or
It does it right now, our code, because even in the summertime, it's still light out till 9 p.m. Again, that reasonableness of how long a contractor's on property. But no, we don't identify it by season. And again, as Mr. Fearborn indicated, try to utilize current code sections that would apply as well, just unilaterally. We're not trying to make this a totally distinct contractor within the city.
Yeah.
My sense tells me that we've had one person indicated interest in it. So it's going to be a small application in general. I don't think we're going to see even 10% of the city wanting goats. But should we have a scenario where someone's maybe got a little bit of acreage or something and they want to use this and really having trouble controlling it, we've used up our 6 days. Could they apply for a conditional use permit to come back in another time?
I don't know that we'd go to that extent. I think, again, it would be trying to work with that property owner. As long as code enforcement, city staff are aware of what's going on, we're not getting that abundance of complaint on the situation. I think you look at it, each property a little bit uniquely.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Berenson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just quickly, in speaking with the applicant 2 weeks ago, he stated that and this is his intention, it may not be others in the future, but his intention is to have the goats come in and just bring things to a manageable level. It's so overgrown that he feels this is the best solution for him due to the fact that it's full of poison ivy, and his intention is to have the goats come in preferably just one day, and bring this to a level that's manageable for him to now, take over and take care of on his own. And he doesn't have an intention of doing this necessarily in the future, but in this case, it's probably a one-time thing.
Do you have something else, Mr. Fairbrother?
What staff is looking for is there any objection from the council with proceeding in the manner that was just outlined from Mr. Cataret?
Any objection? Okay.
We have our direction, Mr. Cataret.
Mr. Jacobson, did you have something?
I was just going to thank Mr. Cataret. I was the one who asked for, ordinances from the other cities. I appreciate your work on that. It was a little bit, and still is, a little bit out of the box, but as much as I think about it, as much as I've read on it, my fellow council members, particularly Councilman Holman and I, had discussion on it. So I'll call myself intrigued, and I would say go ahead and bring it forward from my standpoint then.
I didn't hear any nays. Is that correct, sir?
Tough to follow that, but they're under other. I did want to make you aware that on November the 12th, a lot of us, some of you may have already seen this legislative alert from the Missouri Municipal League about the limitations that are trying to be imposed upon us, again, for collecting the video service provider fee. And a lot of that, as you know, is used to offset the costs related to our inspections for these right-of-way implementations. And in fact, the bill, if filed and passed, would prohibit or limit our collection of video franchise fees. It would prohibit municipalities from charging linear foot fees on cable television operators, and would remove advertising fees, equipment rental, service charges, and administrative charges for the definition of gross revenue. So those things, the effect to local government is such to the point that the Mayor's Association here in the area said if any of you mayors can and will provide a letter to our Senator Ed Emery, who is proposing this, to let him know that we are not pleased with that piece of legislation. I worked with Mr. Eakey and Mr. Feuerborn. They penned a letter for me. We have one for me to send that I intend to send without letterhead, but if you all were supportive of my efforts here as a mayor's group, I would send it on our regular letterhead. And I would, if everybody's good with that, we'll move forward with the letterhead to Mr. Emery. It hasn't been filed yet. It's pre-filing.
Do you know if Senator Emery's bill would include a moratorium on rate raises to the customer by the cable companies if this were to pass?
I suspect not.
I suspect not either.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. All right, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. We'll do that. And so moving right along, is there anything under other that anyone else would like to bring up to the work session tonight? If not, we're through. Thank you all very much for your attention.
Really did.